But they've been astonishingly good on that. And I think also on the history, perhaps people in this room have a pretty clear idea about the real history of Crimea, what happened there in 1944, what happened to the Crimean Tatars, what the real ethnographics are of that part of the world and of so-called Novorossiya, and why Moldova came into existence, and what the real origins of how Sub-Carpathian Ruthenia became part of Ukraine, and so on and so on. And we know all this stuff, but most people don't. And it's very easy for the Russians to get going on their myth-making and just say, well, this is a historically Russian territory. And this is just lazily reproduced in the media and even in politicians' speeches. But anyway, I will stop there and have some
you wrote a piece where you basically warned that we might be heading towards World War III, that this might be the beginning of a conflict of that scale. But you also wrote in that piece that you think that the Baltic states are almost certainly Putin's next target. What makes you think that?
Well, I think that the problem for us is that the Baltic states are militarily quite difficult to defend, particularly if Sweden's not involved. And it's a serious military problem, defending the Baltic states. At the moment, I don't think this is a secret. The NATO plan is to put a third of the Polish army into the Baltic states very quickly in the event of a crisis. That's a bit. Meanwhile, Poland will be reinforced by other NATO members. That's quite a big ask for Poland. And I think that there's, that's one of those gaps I was talking about. If everything's working absolutely smoothly, I'm sure it'll happen. If it's not working smoothly, I wonder. So you've got a real. It's a thin, flat strip of territory, no natural frontier. There's not much depth in the Baltic states for defending it. So it's essentially there's an essential military problem there. You've also got all the problems of area denial weapons, which Russia's quite good at. Yeah, it's non-trivial if we want to reinforce them by air, and they've got missiles in Kaliningrad, which they have. It becomes tricky. So that's the sort of first thing. And the second thing, there are vulnerabilities there. You've got the Russian-speaking population, not fully integrated, open to provocation. You only have to read. And I really commend you to do this. Read the latest report of the KAPO, the Estonian security police, and read about this systematic program, ongoing program, by the Russians to recruit. But this is a GRU and FSB joint program, recruiting young teenagers and young men and young women from the Russian-speaking community in Estonia, which in fact is all of Estonia is Russian-speaking. So I just there myself fell into the Kremlin trap, but of the pro-Kremlin population or potentially pro-Kremlin, and taking them off to Russia for paramilitary training. They do this exactly the same in Latvia as well. There's ongoing efforts to try and build up pools of potential provocateurs. There's ongoing information warfare against these countries. It is happening. There's ongoing economic warfare, mucking around with the, closing the east-west transit lines, and then saying to one country, well, we've done this to them, we'll do it to you too, because if you're nice to us, then maybe we'll change it round. So, and my big worry is that we decide that we're going to do something because of Article 5 and NATO and all the rest of it. And there's a miscalculation. We could very easily get into a kind of Baltic missile crisis where we insist that we're going to do something because we have the right to do it. The Russians say don't do that. And suddenly you've got nuclear forces going on alert. And then what do we do? So I think because of our weakness now, we are risking, I'm not saying certain, but I think we're risking a very serious, unpredictable situation in the Baltics, possibly even later this year, with both sides issuing ultimata, both sides putting forces on alert, and really incalculable consequences.
I'll love the rest of the panel to comment on that. And then I think we'll round off and we'll have a Q&A where we'll let the audience come in and ask questions as well. So about 10 more minutes and then it's over to you. Gudrun, would you like to comment on that?
Just very briefly on military training. As we sit here today or tomorrow, there is a law being passed in Russia making it possible for minors to be involved in military training. They are changing that law as we speak. So,
and just very briefly also on the Baltic states that you mentioned in the context of the information war, which I agree is extremely important and which is just being ignored unfortunately, by many Western actors. But whenever I'm in, you know, in the Baltic states and the capitals, I always raise this point that there should be this concerted Putin propaganda, which is absolutely true. If you read most Russian language newspapers in Latvia, for instance, you know, it's worse than Dmitry Kiselyov. Or at least it's the same. It's Putin's propaganda. And I always raise this point when I'm in Riga, in Tallinn, and Vilnius, that there should be good Russian language media sources, you know, countering this propaganda. I don't think there's enough of that now.
There isn't any of it.
Well, there are some, but you know, very little. I know so there are a couple of radio stations, for instance, in Riga. I think Domskaya Ploshchad is called. There are some, but that's clearly not enough. And there's absolutely no reason for this. There should be good sources of independent, objective information in Russian language in the Baltic states, and I do hope they wake up to this fact and start doing this. This is a real problem. Just a quick point to illustrate this. In the last parliamentary election, or so-called parliamentary election that we had in Russia in 2011, even according to the official results, right, as you remember, in United Russia, Putin's party, could not even manage to get over 50% of the vote, even according to the official results. The real results we know from independent observers was around 35% of the vote for Putin's party in 2011. In the Baltic states, among those who voted in the Russian election, in Lithuania, it was 56% for Putin. In Latvia, it was, no, in Estonia, it was 65%. And in Latvia, it was 77% who voted for Putin, of the Russians who voted in Latvia. So this is on the par of Chechnya and Dagestan. And that shows the scale of the Kremlin's propaganda work for the, how should I put it, not to fall in a trap, the native Russian-speaking populations in the Baltic states. So I think there should really be a more integration effort in terms of creating good independent information sources in the Russian language, which is the Ukrainians are doing, by the way.
I agree. But so just come back on it. You said there's no. It's conceptually very difficult in a democracy to say we're going to take taxpayers' money and put it into subsidising media in a particular language, which is going to take a particular point of view. I agree we should do it.
It shouldn't be a point of view. It should just be objective information.
Well, okay, that is a point of view. To say this is going to be portraying pro, even if you say in a balanced way, pro-European and pro-NATO and pro-Western, and
again, just balanced, just professional, not propaganda.
Well, I agree, but I mean that in itself is, I mean, you're going into a media space where you've got existing commercial entities, and you're throwing taxpayers' money into subsidised competition against them. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but this is non-trivial
Oh, absolutely. I'm a former journalist, I understand, but I'm not talking about counter-propaganda, not at all, in the way that The Economist is not a propaganda tool. It's just a normal source of information.
I think I'd like to allow Gudrun to have a point here as well. Do you agree that there should be more integration efforts made from the Baltic states to integrate the Russian minorities, or would that just offer Moscow a pretext for saying that this is sort of a hostile measures?
No, I think we must learn from what we've seen so far, and that is that Putin and the Kremlin is one step ahead all the time. That would speak in favor of Ed's comment that the next step is probably the Baltic states. We must at least think that thought. And again, one thing that at least would take away a possible source of inconvenience would be, and I know this is politically impossible, but just to do what the Russians do, you hand out passports. You hand out passports to the people in Narva, and you hand out passports to the people who are not fully citizens. And I know I'm going to get slaughtered for this, but it seems to me that would take away an argument for the Russians to step up.
I strongly disagree, but we can get into that later.
I knew you would.
Let's see if there are people in the audience who agree or disagree. Mats will walk around with a microphone.
Before we start the Q&As, I would like to thank Karin for moderating the panel, and also all the three of you. I must say that you're all equally welcome, but Vladimir is an old friend from the Magnitsky International, the international group of politicians that are working for the Magnitsky sanctions, not only in the United States, but also in the European Union. Good luck with your work for the Institute for Modern Russia, because some of us still believes that there is a modern Russia that has to have a voice in United States and Europe in these days. Particular feature of this conference is that we don't only put the experts on stage, but also in the audience. So with 100 experts on these matters, I'm sure there will be many hands in the air for the last 25 minutes before we go to lunch. The rule is, of course, that you don't give another speech, but you have sort of 30 seconds to pose your questions to some of the people here. I will start with the first question myself to Edward to make a promotion for your books. In your book of 3 years ago, Deception, you have a story that fascinated me, which I think is appropriate today. That is the time that the Russians spent preparing the invasion in Georgia. It wasn't a thing that just happened. You say it was years and years of planning, military planning and provocation and subvert action. So my question is really, what is the calendar for what is happening in Ukraine these days? When was it decided by Putin, or maybe somebody else? I don't want you to go back to 1917, but when does this operation really start in Ukraine? Because we have had the, I won't blame the Swedish media, they've been very good at reporting on what is happening in Ukraine, but we still, many Swedes like to believe that this was a sudden thing that happened because something happened at Maidan. What is your take on that?
I think that we tend to assume that Putin has a kind of carefully laid out plan with beginning, middle and end, and that he follows it. And I don't think that's right. I think there is a overall strategic concept of what he wants, and then a pretty opportunistic, tactical response where when an opportunity arises, he seizes it. And he often does, and he quite often does things in a way that give a lot of room for retreat if it doesn't go well. So it'd be quite easy for him to bring home the men in green and leave the separatists in eastern Ukraine to continue without so much support, and it would still be difficult for the Ukrainians. I suspect there was a contingency plan for how to seize Crimea, which was there probably with from many years back. It's always been obviously something that they might need to do, and I think that the demoralization, the really striking thing for me was that the Ukrainian forces in Crimea could have put up quite a fight. If you'd had a really good government in Kiev, I think it would have been really difficult for the Russians to do what they did. You had, I think, 190 Ukrainian bases there. They could have been the ones blocking airfields, seizing road junctions, corralling people in their bases. But ultimately, they didn't receive any orders from Kiev, and that was the first 2 stages of this 8-stage next-generation warfare, which is in this Yanis Verzhin's paper that I mentioned, involved creating, tilting the playing field, so you've got all the political and economic advantage, and then confusing and degrading the willpower of the people making commands, so they don't give the right commands, and that was. So I think that involved was an organised precondition. But I wonder, I suspect Putin made some miscalculations in Ukraine. I think he assumed that he would get what he wanted by arm-twisting Yanukovych. I think he thought that he could do deals with Yanukovych who would deliver him the whole of Ukraine, and maybe there would be some public order problems in western Ukraine, and he'd be dealing with a kind of Maidan-style thing there. But I think he was taken by surprise by Maidan, and he genuinely didn't understand. He thought it was narcomani, drug addicts, provocateurs, Western spies, people paid by oligarchs and so on. And I think this authentic pro-European sentiment is still a bit baffling to him. He doesn't really understand it. He put too many chips on Yanukovych. Yanukovych ultimately broke and ran away. Putin was visibly quite annoyed with that. But he reacts to things. You know, I think there's a difference that when an unexpected turn of events happens, for us, we sit back and think quite hard about what to do. Putin reacts pretty quickly and moves on to the next option, which is why he's always one step ahead, even if it isn't his main plan that's